Okay, so everyone, it is officially 10 o'clock, at least according to my computer. So if you would all like to join me in welcoming our keynote for Reciprocity. And this is going to be a presentation discussion. And then at the very end, we'll open it up to discussions up to like a moderated community question and answer session. But you can begin now. Thank you so much for being here.
OK, Sanlay, Julia. Agela-san, Sangeli, Zoya-ha, Yuchi-ha, Muscogee, Shadane, Adene. Good morning, everyone. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here. My name is Dan Wildcat. I am a Zoya-ha, a Yuchi member of the Muscogee Nation, sometimes referred to as the Creek Nation of Oklahoma. And I want to, acknowledge and honor the place where I'm sitting. I'm sitting here on the ancestral homelands of the Kaw people, and ironically, or maybe I should say predictably, through the depredations of United States Indian federal Indian policy, the Kaw Nation, the very people whose name Kansas, the state of Kansas, comes from, were removed to north central Oklahoma, where they reside today. But this was their ancestral homeland along this Kansas River. I'm less than probably half a mile as it meanders across the northern edge of Lawrence, Kansas. I'm also sitting probably no more than 2 miles directly north of the Wakarusa wetlands, which part of that wetlands, we're so fortunate at my home institution, Haskell Indian Nations University. Those wetlands are actually on the southern edge of our campus. So we have a wetlands on our southern campus at Haskell Indian Nations University. So I want to honor and recognize, acknowledge the Kaw people, the Osage people who were familiar with this area too and moved through this area frequently hunting, fishing, trading. And I would really be remiss if I didn't point out that the very land I am sitting on right now, where Lawrence, Kansas was founded, was conveyed in the United States Treaty with the Wyandotte tribe of March 17th, 1842. Robert Tail, a Wyandotte indigenous person, was given 640 acres, of which I am sitting pretty much right in the middle of that now, and conveyed this portion of land in the Treaty of 1842 and also subsequent Treaty of 1855. So I can tell you, I think probably before myself, the last indigenous person who possessed this land, Mr. Robert Tail of the Wyandotte tribe of Oklahoma, at that time of Kansas. And of course, the Wyandottes were a part of a removal process from the east too. But so I want to recognize them and give thanks to this land, this air, the water that is a gift, to each of us every day. We don't have to pay anything to take that first breath of life in the morning. And I'm sitting on really rich alluvial soils, and the water I drink, I bathe in and use in my home comes from the Kansas River, the Wakarusa River, Clinton Reservoir, and then some from alluvial soils I'm sitting on top of. So very thankful for the fact that I'm sitting here and with you today. And so I told Laura when she invited me, I was just going to talk story today. And I've been listening, not for the entirety, but off and on through yesterday and early today. And I've really been impressed with the nature of the discussions, the questions that have been asked, and I think I'll be provocative enough that you'll have a lot of questions for me when I'm done. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to try to keep my remarks here to, let's say 30 minutes, maybe 35 minutes, and then we will open it up for discussion, and that's where the real learning takes place. So, you know, talking story about traditional or indigenous traditional ecological knowledges, by the way, I always use the plural unless I'm going to make some general remarks about sort of the philosophy and some of the guiding principles, common denominators of many TEKs on this planet that indigenous people hold. It needs to be plural because Anishinaabe TEK is not Dene TEK, is not Apache TEK, is not Cherokee, is not Coast Salish Lummi TEK, or our relatives there in the Wabanaki Confederacy, there in today what we would call the United States state of Maine. Our knowledges and the power and the beauty of traditional ecological knowledges is that they are really born out of an incredible hundreds of years, in some cases thousands of years old, symbiotic relationship between a particular people and a particular place on this planet. You know, reciprocities, the reciprocal nature of traditional ecological knowledge is our possession of that knowledge, our holding, I should say, of that knowledge. I don't know that we own it, but we hold that knowledge dearly. That knowledge is always, you know, tied to particular places. And I happen to believe, I'm going to talk today, try to make 4 major points about traditional ecological knowledges, and suggest to you really that this is a time for us to be very careful, very circumspect, and think deeply about the character of traditional ecological knowledges, some fundamental principles that are widely shared among indigenous people who hold these knowledges dear across the planet, but find the expression of that knowledge unique to those peoples and their particular places, the landscape and seascape they call home. I think we have to be very careful now, because I don't think we want to get in a situation where we, without tribal consideration, without deep consultation among and with our own peoples about what is shared, what is not shared, what is the character and the purpose of these particular knowledges. These are all questions that we need to think about. I was asked years ago to do a presentation at the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. I hope some of my ITEP relatives are here today. And when they contacted me, the original discussion was, so we'd sort of like to talk about respectful collecting of TEKs. And I thought about that. Something didn't ring right, you know, respectful collecting. And it occurred to me that that's the kind of worldview we want to avoid. Our TEKs are not for collecting. They demand first and foremost respect, because the way I'm going to formulate it today is I'm going to suggest to you that our responsibilities, our human responsibilities with carrying this knowledge are first and foremost to the community that gave us that knowledge. And it won't surprise any of you here, that is a community of which humankind is just one member, but made up of the plants, the animals, the soil, the land, the air, the wind, the water of our homelands. Maybe today of the places where we reside and now call home. And so this knowledge is, the way I'm going to talk about it today is first and foremost a deep community-based knowledge. And that community, I am making the argument we need to think about, is the fish, the birds, the insects, the plants, the animals, and all of these other than or more than human persons that are a part of what I would call an ecocultural community. And I happen to think that TEKs are some of the most powerful knowledges we have today on the planet. I think Indigenous voices this century will be some of the most important voices on the planet to be listened to if we are going to avoid the worst, most damaging, deadly consequences of the global climate change that is now underway. In short, I would put forward the premise that traditional ecological knowledges are the antidote to destruction. The destruction that interestingly marks the age of man, or what, those big picture Earth historians now call the age of the Anthropocene, the age of man. So far, the age of man has not been very good, folks, for our more than human relatives, the plants, the animals, for the water, for the soil, for the air. And I think it's because really, we live today in a room full of mirrors. I mean, I'm sitting in my home office, I told you, not far from the Kansas River and fairly close, okay, to the Wakarusa River and the Wakarusa wetlands. But it's amazing how little time most modern people spend out of doors today. Our knowledges, that ancient wisdom that was emergent from these deep indigenous traditional ecological knowledges, came from our out-of-door relatives. We kind of live in a room full of mirrors today. That's the problem, isn't it? All we look at is what we've created, what we've done, and aren't we great, humankind? I think the proper attitude of when working with TEKs ought to be one of respect, and most importantly for the humans that are carrying such knowledge, as elders I have met have embodied humility, deep humility about the use of this knowledge, its purpose, and then how it might be shared. And so I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade, and I really enjoyed Dr. Gretchen Golden's presentation earlier. It is good that federal agencies, departments, bureaus are thinking or realizing that the first peoples of this land hold valuable knowledge, practical knowledge about how to live well in a particular place on the planet. The beauty of traditional ecological knowledges, because they are born of this symbiotic relationship between a people and a place, is they affirm one of the fundamental features of this Mother Earth, our Earth Mother, and that is the diversity of life that she supports. And for humans, when living well and respectfully, very diverse ways of living on the planet. The first very positive thing about traditional ecological knowledge is it will disabuse you of any sort of one-size-fits-all view of the world. Unfortunately, I think we still have a lot of people who have a one-size-fits-all view of solutions to the planet, to the problems of the planet. What global climate change, what our own intellectual, spiritual, and cultural traditions tell us is that our responses will be unique and relevant and respectful to depend on the place, that landscape or seascape we call home. That is a tremendously important insight today. We don't all need to live in our relationship with this beautiful thin home we have on our mother, in our mother's biosphere, the same way. How we live, what we eat, what we raise, even how we clothe ourselves, the dwellings that we live in. Think of what we could do if we had a whole generation of architects and engineers, and I know there's some probably listening right now, who are exploring what are the insights, the wisdom that we could take from looking at some of our traditional dwellings, and how might we take some of that knowledge, wisdom, and apply it in how we think of building homes today. That's an application of traditional ecological knowledge or knowledges. People living in different kinds of dwellings, in different places. So my cautionary note is that as we think deeply about traditional ecological knowledges, is that, and someone brought this up in an earlier chat, and I thought it was an excellent point. We have to be vigilant to disabuse people of a notion that they can just take something that works on the Northwest coast among my Coast Salish relatives, and they should apply that, okay, in Central Texas. Well, maybe not, okay? Or that wisdom of, you know, our Hopi farmers, traditional farmers, that can be taken and applied up in the Great Lakes. Well, we know better. But I think this is one of the problems with people who think of knowledge as somehow separated from a particular place and a people. They just take it, they collect it, and then they end up disrespecting it, and they end up in misusing it. So we have a real challenge ahead of us and a great opportunity to sort of inform people about some of the basic features of traditional ecological knowledges. And one of the things and there are all kinds of challenges. I'm just gonna scrape the surface, folks, and then let's dive in with some deeper questions and thoughts, okay? When I get done. So I've made my first point, okay? TEKs, plural. We have to honor the fact that there are many TEKs because traditional ecological knowledge is always tied to a people and a place. Second point, and I think this could be one of the most powerful points, contributions Indigenous people could make today. Because of the relational character of many of our ancient worldviews, and this notion that we never saw ourselves living in a world full of resources, but as full of relatives. I don't know if anyone, I'm probably dating myself, but I don't know if anyone happened to remember a program that was done on the 25th anniversary of Earth Day. My friend George Godfrey, Potawatomi tribal member, Citizen Band Potawatomi tribal member at Haskell, and myself worked with some people from USDA to bring a bunch of elders to DC for the 25th anniversary of Earth Day. And Orrin Lyons, faith keeper, among the Haudenosaunee, Orrin Lyons got up and gave this great presentation, and he talked about the fact that, when the state of New York or federal natural resource officers came to talk to them about how they could better manage their resources, Orrin said, we'd always stop them and say, well, first problem is we don't live among resources. In our language, we acknowledge the plants, the animals as relatives. This is such an important point today. And it carries with it all kinds of complementary attributes that we desperately need to embody as humankind today. The first one is that in our oldest traditions, creation, all of creation, is a moral and ethical sphere. This idea of objective, value-free knowledge, no. In our traditions, the knowledge conveys values, a way to live well. And we often find this expressed today. Some of my younger students and colleagues like to always talk about being in right relations. Bingo, that's what it's about. Are we in right relations with the land, the air, the water, and the life of the places we call home? So we need to be very, very clear that, yes, it is about ethics. It is about an earth ethics, if you will, that we are explicitly often embracing when we talk about traditional ecological knowledges. I think that's a very powerful point, and it's one that we should never back off of, okay? This also explains why we wrestle often with people, and again, there are some people who are doing some very good and interesting work about this idea called ecosystem services. And they want to put they say, well, in the world we live in, everything has a dollar value, and the only way we're going to save the wetlands, the forests, those coastal estuaries, those riparian ecosystems is we've got to be able to make an economic argument about their value. Well, I understand what they're saying, but I'm just speaking for myself. I'm really uneasy with the idea that true to our own intellectual traditions, that we're going to place a monetary value on our natural relatives. It'd be kind of like saying, what's the value of your auntie or your uncle? Can you put a dollar value on it? Well, no, I'm not. Okay, I'm not going to do that. And so I think we're in a position to affirm that the crisis we have today, in part, is a moral and ethical crisis, and it's one that's built on a worldview that is essentially extractive. We have been treating, no, I shouldn't say we, some of us on the planet have been treating the world as if it's an ATM machine, and we are endlessly withdrawing the wealth out of the machine. Well, I'm sorry. The earth is not a machine. And if we are going to be good relatives among all of this natural kinfolk we share the world with, we're not going to constantly be engaged in extractive and calculative activities. Now, I'm going to point out, I'm making an argument on principle. I think here's the difficult thing. Are there times when people might engage in ecosystem services kind of logic? Maybe. You know, sometimes in desperate situations, you will do anything you can to save the life of a relative, wouldn't you? But we need to be clear. We need to be clear in our own mind that part of what the value of traditional ecological knowledge represent is a kin-centric view of the world, wherein the primary things we're talking about are respect. If we show respect, these reciprocities just happen. Okay, this give and take, this symbiotic relationship. And we have to think about our responsibilities, you know, to be good relatives. So my second point is just very simple. It's that, you know, we need to be ever vigilant about falling into the trap of thinking that we have to assign an economic value to everything that we hold dear and view as the source of our ancient tribal wisdom. And one of the strengths we have is that we understand that this whole world we're a part of is indeed a very lively moral sphere where values play a tremendous role in decisions we make. Second, or third, okay, that was my second point. My third point, I think one of the challenges we have, and I'm so glad someone brought up, well, where's the role? You know, we've got the professors like Dan Wildcat, we got the scientists at NSF, at NCAR, at NOAA, at NASA, and all of these people now who hopefully work with or trying to understand how they might respect indigenous knowledges. And yet, okay, one of the challenges we have is that in our ancient traditions, these knowledges were never written down. And in fact, I'm going to problematize this one step further. And I'm going to suggest to you that one of the difficulties, challenges we have today is that often the very people who might hold these knowledges, in some cases, are not going to be comfortable just sort of talking about what they know. One, they don't do that because the strength of traditional ecological knowledges is that they are embodied and embedded knowledges in our culture. This is my third point. John Dewey talked a lot in his philosophy about this invidious distinction between knowing and doing. The value of TEK is the knowledge is held in the doing, in the act of. My dear friends, some of you here, I know, probably had the good fortune to meet or work with Oscar Coagli at some time. I hope you did. He was a beautiful Yupik scholar. And I met Oscar when I started really focusing my work on climate change and its impact on Indigenous peoples. And I remember having a discussion with Oscar one time, and my biggest regret is it never happened, because Oscar started his journey to the stars before I could ever go visit his fish camp. He said, Dan, if you want to really understand my Yupik culture, you need to go to fish camp with me and my family. Absolutely. You don't spend a lot of time talking about what you know. You simply do it. The knowing is in the doing. And you know, this has really become this is something I've become keenly aware of in the last 2 decades. And I give you one illustration from my dear friend and mentor, the late Vine Deloria Jr. Go through his 20 books, dozens and dozens upon articles, law review papers, legislative review papers, and as kind of one of the deans of American Indian Treaty Law and thinking deeply about governments, our own governments, it's interesting. You will very seldom find Deloria talk about democracy in his writings. And I think that's because when you exercise democracy, when you live democratically, you don't need to talk about it. It's just what you do. This is one of our challenges, and I think we need to be very aware of this, is that we need to honor the fact that, and this is why it's really crucial that in this sort of classroom, as I'm describing it, our larger community where TEKs are born, where they emerge from, okay, I think we've got to really emphasize the fact that these knowledges are very practical, life way knowledges that sometimes are not served well by simply codifying or try to translate into the colonizer's language for broader consumption. That's a discussion we need to have, the nature of that. Okay. Ultimately, and this is my last point, we could go, there's a lot more we could talk about. I just wanted to frame a discussion today about some of the reasons I think we need to be very respectful of Indigenous traditional ecological knowledges, and why we need to think deeply about in what manner and how those are shared and understood. There's a lot of work for us to do, a lot of work. And here's the good news, folks. My fourth point would be that because TEKs are decidedly non-anthropocentric, our teachers are still out of doors. I think we need a whole movement across our native lands, in our communities, and first and foremost, in our schools. I'm not opposed to giving students an iPad or a laptop. Okay, that's a tool. But looking at a flat screen about a forest or a wetland or a river or a coastal estuary is such an impoverished experience compared to telling the student to shut the thing off, turn it off, and just get out of doors and back into our natural communities. And here's the good news. Yes, have we lost some knowledge? Probably. I know among my Zoyaha relatives, I had a discussion with my dad one time about, some of my relatives who held the knowledge, and he said, yeah, he says, but when they left, when they started their journey to the other side, he was worried that a lot of the knowledge they held wasn't passed on. That happens. We can address that by doing away with this horrible segregation we do of elders in our communities. Why is it we segregate old people and the youngest in our communities? We ought to envision places where we constantly have them together, where education can occur, and out of doors. So the good news is, the hopeful news is that if people start paying attention again, they will gain knowledge. They can model knowledge and how they live and what they do, embody that knowledge, and that knowledge can be carried on, as we did in our oldest traditions and stories, ceremony, song, customs, habits. And I think we've got a really great opportunity today to start a full-scale effort to do that kind of work. And again, my fourth point, while we've lost some of our wisest human elders, we still have a lot of elders out of doors, relatives, the trees, the plants, the earth itself, that lake, that river, that ocean, that coastal estuary, which is ready to teach us if we are willing to pay attention again and be mindful and respectful of the fact that, and this is a generalization, for the great number of Indigenous peoples I've had the good pleasure to meet and work with, we have traditions where we never understood as our lives in a world full of resources. We understood as a world full of relatives. No one values liberty and freedoms as much as Indigenous peoples, but we always countered unalienable rights and freedoms with unalienable responsibilities. And that's what we have right now. We have a responsibility to continue the work of honoring, of respecting, of building, of creating traditional ecological knowledges. And there are all kinds of challenges, a huge number of challenges. That's what I always say, right? The devil's in the details. But I think if we can keep a kind of a clear view of what it is that we value and why it's valuable and why we need it today more than ever as the antidote to the destruction we see every day on this planet, I think we can get some good work done. Sanlay Gadasawa, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I'm really looking forward to your questions.
Yeah, okay, so first, we just have a comment from someone saying, thank you, Daniel. Yes, we have to get outside and connect to the land and shift away from the anthropocentric view we have lived through for many centuries now and see our place with our relations and our mother earth. Aho. And then we have a question from Sarah. Says there's a lot here that resonates with me given my field research and teaching work lately, especially about listening to the land and learning together outside. Can you speak about examples of effective collaborating learning methods you've seen in action?
Yeah, one of the things that we're fortunate, remember I mentioned my home institution, Haskell Indian Nations University, our southern campus sits on the Wakarusa wetlands. They extend clear onto the southern part of our campus. And some of you, this will resonate because I know you heard about it. Back about 30 years ago, the city of Lawrence decided in their infinite wisdom to build a traffic way through that wetlands, which, by the way, I'm sad to report they subsequently did, but not without a fight from our students, alumni, and supporting faculty for almost 20 years to try to stop that from happening, that desecration. So they built their traffic way. Okay, in the process, they just agreed to pull up a 31st Street, which was a county road, or a county road, and restore and right-of-way easement we had granted for that county road years ago. I mean, a long time ago, and return that to us. And so we've got students now that are doing wetlands restoration work down there, and this is really, you know, some tough work, but I think this is an example. And so I really appreciate any of you that are doing field work, research, teaching, learning. I think what Dr. Bridget Chapin has done at Haskell in getting her students out, working in our wetlands, doing everything from looking at the microorganismal life of the water, to the soils, to the hydrology, again, to the plants and animals of the wetlands. How can we restore that to be a biologically diverse environment in spite of this incredible perturbation of this bypass that was created through there? It's a little bit further south than what they had originally produced, but it goes right through the middle of this Wakarusa wetlands. And so I think that's an example, and those of the rest of you that are working with students and field work and getting them out of doors. It doesn't matter whether you're doing riparian ecosystem restoration, forest, restoration, grasslands, prairie restoration. I think that's the key. that's the key. I think one of the things that we should, again, sort of try to advance and advocate for as much as we can, and that is that I believe the best science education takes place out of doors, not inside a classroom sterilized lab. That's where our human relationships get restored in an existential and very empirical way with the balance of our kin we share this world with.
Awesome, great. So we have another thank you and people telling you how wonderful your talk was. And then next question is, what would be your advice on, oops, one sec, sorry.
Okay.
Leanne has a question that says, so many school systems, administrators, and politicians do not understand the connection and value of the outdoor component of education. Can you offer some guidance in how to elevate this conversation so that in the education system, there's includes a continuum of meaningful outdoor experiences throughout student lives?
Yeah, get involved with your local school board, with the leadership in your school district. And I know many of us are in different situations. Some of you may be fortunate to have your own tribal schools, K through 12 schools. Some of you are like me, have a son who's went his whole, education life through public schools. But I think Lawrence, Kansas is a marvelous example of what we should do around Indian country. Now, it's primarily because of Haskell, Indian Nations University. I don't have to tell all of you, Lawrence, Kansas, we have another university here. I call her our little sister, the University of Kansas. And she's up there on the hill. That's our little sister, because we were here for Indigenous people were here for a long time before our little sister arrived. But here's what's happened in Lawrence, Kansas. I think we have something like a 9-member school board. We currently have 3 Native women, Indigenous women, who sit on the school board. That's power. That's power. And there are advocates. And so I think that's one of the things, that there are so many opportunities for us to be engaged and do this work. And that would be one of them, get involved in your children's education and be that advocate and talk to the school board, talk to the principal, talk to the teachers. And I will tell you, this isn't easy, because they will give you endless reasons for why they can't do that and why that's difficult for them to do. And then I think that's where we have the opportunity, to really help them solve some of those problems. But that's what I would suggest. That's one of the venues where I think the door's wide open for us to get much more involved. So in Lawrence, Kansas, now we have 4 Native women on the school board. It's awesome.
Our next question comes from Jessica Hernandez, who says, thank you for this amazing keynote. It is an honor to share this virtual space with you, given all the work you have done to ensure our generation of Indigenous scholars can have the opportunity to tell our own stories instead of our stories being told for us. Referencing your book, The Red Alert, you reference Indigenous peoples having faced 4 types of displacement. How do these types of 4 displacements impact TEK in your point of view?
Oh, it was a catastrophic impact. Okay. So really what I talked about, was those of us like myself, my ancestral homelands are along the Savannah River in going clear up into South Carolina. Those were, I'm aware of, the earliest villages, Zoyaha, Yuchi people villages were, and we were removed to eastern Oklahoma. So again, this is interesting, right? Because it again highlights the fact that those were so traumatic moves, because we not only lost family members in those brutal, violent removals, okay, but we were being removed from the family we knew, the plants, the animals, the medicines. So terribly dramatic. And another one of the removals I talk about is the Indian boarding schools. And I guess I'm trying to do some penance, right? So here I am teaching at Haskell Indian Nations University that started, over what, 130 years ago as the United States Indian Industrial Training School. But we're trying to change that whole story. We're making the narrative here ours, trying to hold up our indigenous knowledges, our indigenous wisdom, okay? And even thinking about how that can shape how we teach, our pedagogy, our assessment, how we, evaluate students and their learning. So it's a big move. But TEK has really, someone mentioned earlier, I think they were talking, if I remember right, I heard someone mention, I think they must have been speaking in Colorado, but they said, our Arapaho tribal reservation now is in Wyoming, but we used to live all along the Front Range. And so we have a lot of knowledge of that areas. And this is one of the challenges. One of the challenges is keeping that knowledge and the connectivity to places that we were removed from. But again, I think all of this can be overcome. We just have to think very creatively about how we do that. And then if we have been removed to a new place, I think we immediately set up that effort to get connected to that place, to find out, how we can be a good relative in that community. Okay. And so thank you for the question. I think, we're still in a period of removal. I think right now, I've added a 5th removal, and I think, again, I'm so thankful we have this technology for this purpose today, right? But we got to be careful, because our students are being removed from the world around them by spending all their time looking at flat screens. And like I say, that is unfortunately often a very distorted and pale reflection of the beauty of the world outside of doors and beyond our flat screens. So we're kind of in the midst of now what I'm calling a technological removal. We're literally being removed from the beauty of the earth around us by people constantly fixating on their flat screen devices. They're smart devices. And by the way, okay, you can quote me on this. The problem with smart devices is they produce stupid people. Everyone thinks, oh, I'll just look it up on my phone. Our ancestors were wise and they didn't have to look anything up on the phone. That is something we should aspire to today.
We have time for one last short question. So I'm just going to ask Raylan, was wondering, it seems like there's a lot of TEK efforts that exist in the academic world. How can we get local and tribal communities to engage in these efforts? Do you know of tribal government initiatives that engage in TEK beyond cultural and language preservation?
Yeah. So first of all, a whole big push on, language preservation, as rightly there should be, because our language revitalization, restoration, preservation is critical, because language are a critical part of that. So that's good work. But this idea of How do we promote this kind of larger framework and understanding of our human knowledges about the world and our place in it? I think there are tribes that are doing some good work in Kansas. Interestingly, the very small Sac and Fox Nation is doing an incredible job at this. In fact, so, you know, the BIA tribal grants that they give, you know, the BIA gives climate change grants, adaptation grants to tribes. They took theirs, and I was talking to one of my former students, and they've created a summer internship program for their Sac and Fox children to be in the forest lands along the Missouri River. And they're going to learn all about the forest, all about the ecosystems, and branching out onto the rangelands as you move away from the Missouri River. That's impressive, because they're thinking, well, our way to adapt is to make sure our young people know the place they live and understand it and can see the beauty and the knowledge that resides there. And so I think that's one example. I think it's a good one.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wildcat. I'm incredibly humbled to learn from your wisdom and your words and your ability to speak truth to power. I appreciate your keynote. I appreciate everyone attending. Julia, thank you so much for moderating, and we will be moving on to our next session shortly.
Sanlai, everyone. Sanlai, thank you so much.
Thank you.